Good afternoon. My name is Jim Krampits. I'm a communication specialist. I'm sure all of you are aware by now, given my cohort's part of this presentation, that we're all here to talk about how to deal with difficult people in the workplace. My job today is to discuss the communications aspect of how to deal with difficult people at work. Today I will be going over the best strategies to communicate with people who are being difficult, ways to prevent conflict, how to implement strategies of improvement, and the metrics and the ways to measure the success of your communication strategies. My story is simple. After I got past the age of 27, I got married. I wanted to make sure I never miscommunicated anything. I wanted my wife to know and understand me at a better level than anyone else. I wanted to be able to communicate with her back and forth in a free-flowing motion. I began to realize this was like a fire inside me that fueled me to want to know more about how we can effectively communicate with one another. I wanted to learn how to communicate with every person I met, and not only pass on information from me to them, but also to listen to what they had to say. When I listened to what they had to say, I wanted to make sure I was listening and the whole body when I hear them. And I didn't just want to hear them with just my ears. I wanted to hear them with my whole body. You look a little confused? Let me elaborate on that a little. You can listen with your heart, your eyes, your mind, your ears, even your soul. You don't believe me? Well, when you're about to go to a funeral for a friend, you're listening with your heart. How about when you're sad and you're not happy about anything that's going on? You're also listening with your heart. When you're excited to learn something new, you're listening with your mind. When it looks in your faces, you already know where I'm going with this, don't you? When you're at church or at a place of worship or whatever corroborates with your lifestyle preferences, yep, you guessed it, you're listening with your soul. I spent years learning the ins and outs of how to communicate with people from all walks of life and at all levels and times, whether they're mad, sad, depressed, sick, happy, or whatever the situation they're in. So let's just ask before. Are you ready? All right, let's begin. The definition of communication. The Merriam-Webster Dictionary defines communication as a process by which information is exchanged between individuals or through a common system of signs like street signs or behavior between one another that expressed through body language. So you want to know where do you start? Well, let's start by beginning the basics of nonverbal communication. Did you know that one study found that the nonverbal communication accounted for over half, more than 55% of how an audience perceived a presenter? That means the majority of what we're saying is communicated not by what we say verbally, but through the physical cues given off by our body language. That's why it's important that we remember that when we're approaching someone, our body's saying something that our mouth might not be. We got to make sure when you approach somebody, you don't sit there with your arms folded up or your hands crossed together, because you're looking a little bit like you're not open to communication. You're looking more like you're closed about it. When you're talking with other people, you want to make sure you're communicating according to the needs of the person you're listening to. Make sure that you have an idea on what you want to say and how you can deliver that message in a way that you know they'll be able to understand it. The sender of the communication should prepare the structure of the message so that it's not according to their own level or ability, but you should keep in mind the level of understanding of the environment of the receiver. I want you to be aware of your tone and the content of your message. I want you to make sure that the message is framed in a clear and beautiful language. The tone of your message should not injure the feelings of the listener. As far as possible, the contents of your conversation should be brief and avoid using big technical words when you're trying to communicate with one another. We want to try and convey things of help and value to your listener. The subject matter that you're going to be doing, you want the message to be helpful to them. You want their needs and interests that should be especially kept in mind. You want your communication to be more effective in such a situation when this type of thing happens. There are some preventative measures I want you to try and take. Be sure you don't judge. You don't know what the other person is going through. Chances are, if a person is being unreasonable, they're feeling some sort of fear or vulnerability. You want to try and turn those conflicts into negotiations. Find some mutual ground to stand on. I want you to remember to be a good listener. Hear them out. Listen to them as you want someone to listen to you. Try and engage them. Ask them questions about what's going on. Ask them if there's anything you can do that might be able to help them. Try to focus on forward motion. Explaining where you're coming from can make a world of difference in some situations. In some cases, people that seem difficult might be giving resistance because they feel you're the one who's being difficult. You're the one who's not trying to work them with the situation through them, and that you want to make sure you both understand where you're coming from. Lastly, I want you to help them to empathize with you. Here are some tips which I found in dealing with people that it can be difficult when you're working together. First of all, I want you to be calm. Losing your temper and flaring out at the other person is not the best way to get him or her to collaborate with you, unless you know that anger is going to trigger that person into doing the actions and you're constantly and consciously using it as a strategy to move him or her toward a position where they can better assume a calm persona. Someone who's calm is seen as being in control. centered, and more respectful? Would you prefer to work with someone who is predominantly calm or someone who's always on edge? When the person you're dealing with seems you are calm and whatever he or she is doing, you'll start to get their attention. I want you to understand the person's intentions. I'd like to believe that no one's difficult for the sake of being difficult. Even when it may seem that the person is just out to get you, there's always some underlying reason that's motivating them to act this way. Rarely is this motivation an attempt to try and identify the person's trigger. You know what I mean? Try what is making that person act in that manner. Try and think what is stopping him or her from cooperating with you. And try and remember to think to yourself, how can I help you meet the needs and resolve the situation? Another idea, another great tip is to get perspective from others. Before you approach them, if you already know they're a difficult person, they're hard to work with in the workplace, in all likelihood, some of your colleagues, your managers, even your friends might have experienced a similar situation in some way or another. They will be able to see things from a different angle and take a different look on the situation. Try and find them, share your thoughts, share your story with what happened, and see what they have to say. You might find some golden advice amidst all that conversation. Another great tip is to let the person know where you're coming from. The one thing that's worked for me is to let the person know my intentions behind what I'm trying to do. Sometimes they're being resistant because they think you're just being difficult with them. Letting them in on the reason behind your actions and the full background of what's happening will enable them to empathize with your situation. This lets them get on board much easier. Another tip, build a rapport. With all the computers, emails, message systems working, you to turn your work process into a very mechanical situation. Try to reinstill the human side of it by, go with your colleagues, go have lunch with them, go out for a drink or something after work, or even just dinner if you can. I know in all professions that's not possible, but if you ever get the chance to and you can foster a better relationship with your coworkers, man, it'll build a strong connection that will really help you guys get along in your way at work. Lastly, treat the person with respect. Nobody likes to be treated as if they're stupid or incompetent. Remember the golden rule. Do unto others as you'd have do for you. Try to focus on what actions you can be actioned upon. Sometimes you're put in hot water by your colleagues. You might not be receiving the piece of work they promised to give you, or you might be wrongly held responsible for something you did or do. Whatever it is, it's already happened. Let it go. Don't harp on it. You can't change what's already happened. Try to focus on the steps that will move the situation forward and move yourself forward in the situation. Try to ignore it if you can. I know it doesn't sound like a simple thing to do, but if you've already tried all the other steps, try to ignore it last and least. Don't involve yourself in a situation or get too involved in it when it doesn't really truly affect you. And lastly, the absolute last thing I want you to do, if you've tried all the other steps and all else fails, you got no choice. Take it up to the manager. Take it up with your boss. Here it is and everything else fails, go to your manager. That being said, consider this your trump card if you're doing it. It shouldn't be used unless you've completely exhausted all your other means. Sometimes the only way to get someone motivated is by going to the boss. This concludes my proportion on how to help you effectively communicate with difficult people in the workplace. Thank you all for your time. I hope this was informative and helpful for you going forward from this point. My contact information is available at the business cards located by the door where you came in at, should you feel the need to contact me or have any more questions. Thank you all. I'm Jim Krampits. I will now turn you over to our next presenter.